Hello, my name is Greg Simpson. I'm the minister at St. Andrew's United Church in Chatham, Ontario, and I'm putting together this presentation for St. Andrew's College, part of the University of Saskatchewan. I want to thank you so much for joining me in this presentation. So we're going to talk today about streaming video. Mostly, we're going to talk about the technology involved in streaming so that hopefully you, as either ministers or ministry staff or people who have been involved in a church who now find themselves needing to learn a little bit more about streaming video and what the options might be. Hopefully, my goal is for you to come away from this a little more educated and able to make some decisions. So I'll have to warn you, this is going to be more descriptive than prescriptive. And I have a couple of suggestions about some particular technology that is interesting and might be worth looking into. But there are a million different options, and there's no one answer for everybody. So my hope is to talk a little bit about cameras and lights and audio and how those things all work together and how you need to decide and think about all of those things to fit your particular need for streaming. So those are our goals, and let's get right into this. So obviously, to stream anything, you're going to need a camera, and you're going to need a way to collect up the parts that you can hear, and you're going to need to be able to see it, so you'll need some lights, and then there's going to have to be a way that what you're streaming gets collected up and sent to whoever it is you're streaming to. Now, already we've got a question that we need to answer. Do you need to connect with people live? Like, for example, on a Sunday morning, are you going to live stream using something like Facebook Live or YouTube or maybe even a Zoom call? Or is it something you're going to record and then release to other people later? The needs for those two things are quite different. And so I'm going to be mostly focusing on the streaming ones, though a bunch of the technology, certainly the way lights and audio work, they will answer questions for both of them. So when we're talking about this collection of what we're hearing and what we're seeing, and then packing them together and then sending them out onto the internet so that somebody else can consume them, a lot of us already have some experience with that. If you have a laptop that has a little camera on the top, or maybe your desktop has a separate little camera, we're already used to tools that do that. And honestly, if that's the tool you have, and that's the only tool you can afford, please use it. Any camera and any audio is better than none. And so I don't want to think that I'm trying to sell you anything or tell you have to spend a whole lot of money. You can spend lots of money if you like. And I'm going to show you some pictures of the setup that I'm using right now because I have probably spent far too much money. And I'm going to recommend lots of things that I'm doing. Don't do the same as me. My goal is to help you guys learn from my mistakes. But that being said, starting with a camera and a microphone somewhere, you probably can't even see it, but your laptop or even your phone, they've got microphones as well. That's better than nothing. But if you're trying to do something with some production value, if you want to maybe stream a service live on Sunday morning, the camera in your phone or the camera in your laptop probably isn't going to do the job. And most certainly the audio is not going to be good enough, mostly because those things are designed to be held really close to you or be on a laptop right in front of you. And especially if you're streaming a service on Sunday morning where you've got people in the sanctuary as well, having a laptop parked right in front of you probably isn't going to work very well, or it's not going to look great either for the people who are in the congregation or the people who are joining you from home. We need to think about the video and the audio in two different pieces. Because if budget were no restraint at all, I would invite you to get a camera as one thing and a microphone and some amplifiers as a separate thing, and then have them mixed together inside of a computer. That's sort of the best choice. But anytime you're doing that, you need to have enough processing power to make sure that the audio and the video match up together, so that when you're watching my lips, they're matching up with what you're hearing. Something that we've learned, I've certainly learned this about myself, is when audio and video don't match up, it's really disconcerting. I almost can't watch something if it's really out of sync. And so sometimes that happens if the devices you're using just don't quite have the processing power to do all the work of taking in audio and taking in video and mixing them together and then sending them out over the internet. So that's something to be aware of. And so some of the solutions I'm going to suggest a little later on will include maybe a computer that needs some decent processing power or a laptop. But then we're going to talk about some devices that are built specifically, custom built to do exactly that job, and they might work for you. So that's just something to keep in mind as we're walking through this. You might think that the most important part of this equation is going to be the camera, and it's not. In fact, I went about it entirely the wrong way, and I bought a camera first. Now, I'm a bit of a photography nut, and so I knew that I was going to spend some money on a camera. But what I've learned is people can put up with a mediocre picture as long as your audio is good. I'm going to recommend if you're going to spend money anywhere, if you're going to upgrade something, make sure you're getting good audio. So right now, while I'm speaking, I'm actually recording in two different ways. One, my camera right over there has a microphone attached to it, and it's recording. And what I will do is I will switch right now so you can listen to the camera audio versus the microphone audio. So just off the camera, you can't see it right here, but there's a microphone in front of me. And it's a recording microphone that was built for doing voiceover work. It's okay for what I'm doing here, right here, but it's also picking up a lot of the noise in the room. Nice, clean audio is maybe one of the most important parts of all of this. So if you can put some effort in, make sure you can get good, clean audio. Now, then we've got to talk about how that audio is going to match up with the video. In my case, where I've got a camera doing the heavy lifting as far as the video is concerned, I have a microphone that's feeding directly into it. And it does a pretty decent job. It's certainly better than the microphone that's built into the camera. I have a lovely camera, but it was not built to collect audio. But I am going to recommend to you a camera a little bit later that it's a camera built by people who know audio stuff, and it does a really good job. And several musicians and people who really love audio that I know make use of that particular camera for their needs because the audio is so good. It's called the Zoom Q2N, and it is something that will collect up video and audio together. I know of an example where somebody just parked it to the back of a church during a symphony orchestra. So the church was just beautifully amplifying all the sound that was coming off of the chancel. It sounded amazing with no extra gear. Now that is a tool that collects audio and video very well, but it's a few more steps and a bit of a struggle to make it do live streaming. So it's a slightly different tool. As you're going to realize that everything I talk about here is going to be a bit of a balance. What do you really need? What can you spend money on? How are we going to match the technology with what your needs are? So first off, we've got to get good audio. You've got to get it nice and clean, and you need to make sure that the audio headed out to your listener is in good quality. So that isn't just about a microphone, it's also about the space. And so I'll show you here that if you were to walk into the room right now, you'd think, my goodness gracious, Greg, that looks really odd. And so around me are these sound dampening panels. I happen to be in about a 750 square foot room. It happens to be a dance studio. My fiance runs a dance studio, and so I was able to borrow her space, but it has a brick wall and a laminate floor, and that echoes a lot of sound. So I've taken some steps to make sure that some of the echoey sound isn't getting to the microphone. So echoes or reverberation are one thing that can lead to maybe muddy or not as clean audio. And the people who will struggle with that the most are people who struggle with hearing. So some of our older members of churches, echoes are particularly hard for them, especially people who have hearing aids that are trying to do the electronic work of picking out just the part they need to hear. So that's something to bear in mind is when you're doing your recording, if you can make sure you're in a space that's quiet, that really helps. Now, of course, if you're live streaming a service on Sunday morning, you're really stuck with whatever the space is. And so in our circumstance, when I'm live streaming on Sunday mornings, I've got a microphone that actually clips onto my face. And so the mic is right there. And the marvelous tech wizards up in the booth are able to take that audio and send it straight out to our live stream. I'm very blessed that the church that I serve has spent quite a bit of money on audio. Actually, before I got there, they already had really good audio. And then this past couple of years, they spent quite a bit of money on video. They've got 3 different cameras and switching gear, and they can send that live. And they can also take the feed that's going up to the screens and send it out to the live stream. There's a lot of steps going on. It takes 3 or 4 people to run it, and I think it's about $16,000 worth of gear, just to give you that spectrum. And that's by no means the most you can spend. But I just wanted to let you know that another device that I'm going to suggest to you in just a few minutes is about $400 plus some monthly fees. So that kind of gives you a bit of a range. And this little $400 camera called the Mevo, it will do almost everything I'm talking about. It needs a little bit of help in the audio range, but it will do everything to live stream a service without having to spend huge and have 4 volunteers running things. So as you can see, there's a huge spectrum of what we can do. Before I step right into talking about fancy cameras, because I love cameras, you can get by with a fairly poor camera if you have good lighting. Now, that's another place where I took the jump straight into a camera and then realized that a really nice camera with poor lighting still looks poor. But even a mediocre camera, maybe even the camera in your laptop, if you've got good lighting, you can really fool people into thinking that you've put a lot of effort and time and money into your lighting. Now, you can see here that I've got quite a bit of fancy lighting around here. And as I said, I'm part of a dance studio, and we do lots of production numbers. So I'm borrowing their gear for this. But as you can see, I've actually got 3 lights pointed at me right now. I've got this great big light pointing straight at my face. We call that a key light, and it's doing most of the lighting. And it's a really big thing because it actually flattens out and makes sure there aren't too sharp of shadows. So you don't see like a really sharp shadow across my nose or that sort of thing. Now it's coming from a slight angle. And so I've got another light over here called a fill light that's coming up on my face to basically just dampen out a few of those shadows. And that if you just got by with a fill light, with a key light, and that's all, you would do very well. If you have a little bit more, a few more choices, adding a fill is very nice. And then the next one I've got is above my head here. It's actually quite dim. It's not adding much light. And it's called a rim light most frequently, or sometimes a separation light. Because you can see, if you pay attention here, it's actually giving just a little bit of extra light across the top of my hair, on the tops of my shoulders. And what that does is it separates the dark parts of me, because my hair is relatively dark, separates that from the darkness of the background. And so a separation light or a rim light. You can also have one of those and then have it low and behind you, so it's actually just picking up, like it kind of lights up the actual little hairs that stick out here. A few different ways you can do that. Lighting makes a huge difference. And I tell you, this might look pretty expensive, but these little lights that I'm using here, you can get them for about $50 or $60 if you look well enough. I think they're about $90 new, but you can often find people that are selling them off, or I've actually picked up these on auctions. You can get into some really decent lighting relatively inexpensively. Now, the big guy in front of me is a bunch more money. I think the light itself retails for about $170, and then the softbox, the big umbrella thing, I think this is a relatively cheap one. You can spend upwards of $300 on them, but I think that was about $70. 80, somewhere in that range. I'm not telling you have to buy these particular ones. And what I'll do is I will include for you a list of the actual items I'm looking at here, so you can do some comparison shopping of your own if that matters to you. And again, they're all standing on stands. The C stand, which is the guy that holds it up here, those are a little more expensive, but you can get those used at anywhere that is selling out production gear. A stand, as long as it stands up, it does not have to be new by any stretch. In fact, none of the gear I'm talking about needs to be new. So please, if you're trying to save money, look for used. So we've talked about audio. We've talked about the lighting to try and help us out. We've talked about making the room a little bit better. Finally, we get to the camera. And so in my case, I am shooting with a DSLR, or a digital single lens reflex camera. It happens to be a Canon, but you can get Nikon and you can get Sony, actually, is another really great example. This one, I think, retails for around $2,000. You don't need to spend anywhere near that. In fact, you don't need to use a DSLR at all. In fact, I don't even recommend it. They're not particularly awesome at video. I did buy this one because of some of the video features, because I knew I was going to do stuff like this. But a relatively inexpensive video camera, rather than a photography camera will most times do a much better job. In fact, the church that I serve, their cameras are video cameras, not photo cameras. They don't actually take photos at all. And they get a lot more features packed into that camera for less money by saying this is committed to doing video. The biggest single thing that I can tell you is a digital single or a DSLR has a limitation that they can only shoot video for 30 minutes. They can only store for that long. It has something to do with, I think it's a tax thing in the UK. I can't remember what the ruling is, but if you buy a video camera, it basically will shoot video for as long as it can until it runs out of memory space, whereas this one can only shoot for 30 minutes. Now, if you're streaming, then it will be sending it directly out into some other device, and that 30-minute limitation is not a problem. But if you want to record things, you need to know that you're going to get caught off in the middle. And so anytime I'm shooting, especially for YouTube or those sorts of things, I've got to keep in mind that if it cuts off, I'm going to have to cut in some edit or that sort of thing. It adds a few steps. Also, when you're talking about a DSLR, then you're getting into lenses and all sorts of stuff like that. Buying a video camera, even a used video camera, you're going to get really great zoom. You're going to get fairly decent low light capability. Stick with that. You don't need to spend on these sorts of things. That I say specifically because if you go searching YouTube and other places where people talk about what cameras to use in churches, they will often send you towards using a DSLR, and I don't recommend them unless you also have a photography buff who wants to shoot lots of stills. Then it's a good all-around camera. But if it's just video, just streaming, stay away from that. In fact, I'm going to suggest that you maybe look at a device that can be a camera and streaming all in one. Because when I want to stream using this camera, I have to send something from this to my laptop, which is actually parked down here. It's actually doing my recording. It picks up the audio. And then later, I'm going to have to match these two things up so that what I send to you has good audio with the video. My laptop is actually not powerful enough to do all of the things at once and stream. It really bogs down. It has to send low quality video so that it can mix together the audio that's coming in from the mic here and the video that's coming from the camera. It takes a lot of steps. So that's a bit of a warning. And the other thing is that it takes some people who know what they're doing. There are some free tools. There's a particular one called OBS, which I think stands for Open Broadcast System. It's a really great tool. It's not always intuitive if you don't have somebody who's already fairly technically adept. I've gotten to know it and I really like it, but even still there are bumps in the road that I run into where it feels like it should be working, but things won't synchronize. And it is a great tool if you know what you're doing, and it's free and it will run on most laptops. I think it runs only in Windows. So maybe if you're a Mac world, I don't know that. You might have to look for something else. That is one of the free ones. There are many, many other streaming services and tools out there, but I kind of want to recommend this tool called Amivo. It's made by Logitech, and they've been around for a long time, and they make lots of pretty good gear. They make some of the better web cameras, and so they already know that technology pretty well. And so this is a little device. It's not much bigger than a deck of cards, and it's got a camera on one end, and then it connects directly to your network on the other side. And so it can connect to a wireless network. There are a few different versions of them. It can actually capture, store video while it runs, or it can send video out to your network and stream. What I really enjoy, especially for rural churches, if that's where you find yourself, is that you could take your phone or other device, connect it to a connection. I use Rogers, so I'll just name Rogers or Telus or Bell, whoever it is. And as long as you've got enough data and fast enough data, you can actually live stream without having a physical network. And so that's a pretty important thing to think about, is how much data you're going to push out. So let's jump into that for just a minute, because back in March of 2020, when every church realized either they were going to close or they were going to have to go to a live stream, we chose live stream. Except the internet connection at our church, a downtown church, was not good enough to support live streaming. And so for the first month, my phone, this is what we were using to live stream on, because it was faster to go from my phone to the network than it was to connect up a device onto our local church network. So a little bit, it helps you to know some numbers. To do a decent quality live stream, you need to have 10 gigabit up and down. That's really, really good. You can get by with 5. Sorry, I said gigabit. Megabit is what I mean. I apologize. There are some gigabit networks, but that's way, way more than you need. And so if you are on a like a terrestrial one, like it's getting to your church through a fiber optic, or maybe it's through the Bell network, or maybe it's through something like a local cable company, you probably can get that sort of service, as long as you're not a physical problem, which is what we were dealing with. We had to replace some wires that were leading into the church. Most places across Canada, as long as you've got that sort of connection, you can get there. You will never get there with dial-up. You can get there with some of the satellite options, but not many of them. And so just to be aware, it could be that wherever you are, streaming is not an option. And so that's something to consider. And we can talk a little bit more about that in the Q&A. We've talked about the camera, the lights, the sound. I've given you a few specific ideas. So the Mevo is a really good idea for a camera because it kind of encapsulates things all in one. I think they cost around $400, and then there's a monthly charge for some of the features. I think maybe you can get by with just the 400, but you're not going to have many extra features. And then if you want to add some things on, there's some service charges to go with it. So I don't want to tell you it's just buy it and forget it. It does have some other charges involved. If you are not looking to stream, I really want to suggest something like the Zoom Q2N. It's a really great tool because it does amazing audio. If you want to, the Mevo does decent audio, but if you want to, you can actually you can hook up a separate microphone and send audio into it as well. You'll have to talk to somebody who knows a bit about audio because there are 2 different types of cords. The little cords that look like headphone jacks, there's 2 different types of them. One that goes into your phone, and it has like 3 little black lines on it. And then there are ones that only have 2 little black lines on it, and you need to use the right one, or else either your audio will just not come in, or it'll only come out of one side, and you'll wonder, why is it that if I put my headphones on, I'm only hearing on one side? So those are some warnings. You'll need to have somebody who can walk you through some of that. And then if you're going to buy a camera, I'm definitely strongly recommending a video camera. Spend what you can. Shooting, we didn't talk about video quality. Shooting at standard resolution, or like HD resolution, which is 1920 by 1080, or it also gets called 1080p. That's probably all you need. Don't get sucked into 4K. It takes way, way more data. It takes way more processing power. If you're going to shoot video to be edited later, 4K is a little bit better, but you do not need to stream in 4K. In fact, you can stream in 720p, and most people will be perfectly happy with it. In fact, if you're using a tool like Facebook or YouTube to do your streaming, they're probably going to downgrade the video quality so that the audio quality stays high for all the people who are receiving it. Somebody might be out there watching it on their phone, sitting at a stoplight somewhere. So you never know what their quality is out there. So do decent job of the quality, but you don't need to knock yourself out to get the most fancy, expensive, that sort of thing. There are a bunch of little tips and tricks that I have learned, that I have traps I've fallen into, things I would love to help you with about how to get yourself ready to be in front of a camera, whether it's just one-on-one like this, or maybe if you're talking to a camera when you've got other people in a building, like on a Sunday morning, or some sort of a production event of some sort of thing. And what I think I'll do is I will put together a second video with those sorts of things, because this video is already getting pretty long. So I appreciate the time that you have spent with me today. Thank you so much. And I would love to answer all of your questions. And so if you want to reach out to me directly, you can reach me at pastorgreg18, pastorgreg18 at gmail.com, and I'd be happy to answer any of your questions. And I think the next step for us is we're going to have a little question and answer period, and maybe I'll get into some of the tips and tricks if that's what you guys are looking for there. So thank you so much. Bye for now.